Hello, I'm Ben Chu and welcome to Now or Never for AI Policy, brought to you by Project Syndicate in association with 2040 World. Depending on who you believe, artificial intelligence represents either humanity's future, its demise, or just the latest round of Silicon Valley hype. What's undeniable, though, is that for policymakers, it's one of the great challenges of our era. How do you regulate a technology so new that few actually understand it? As powers great and small scramble to answer that, a huge and vital discussion is underway about what to do. So, who is right? That's the question at the heart of today's proceedings, the first event of Project Syndicate's AI Revolutions series. Over the next 50 minutes, we'll be offering up some of the world's top authorities on the issue and asking you, the audience, to judge them on their merits. First, we'll hear from Steven Pinker, Professor of Psychology at Harvard University. And our closer today is Amandeep Singh Gill, the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Technology. Now, before we get started, all the animations you see today and some of the music has been made using generative AI platforms. So, here with a little help from our AI friends, let's take a closer look at the current state of the debate.
We, the field, the technology, the industry, cause significant harm to the world. If this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong.
What to do about artificial intelligence?
Machines that can teach themselves superhuman skills.
Do we risk losing control?
Politicians in Europe will vote on a proposal to bring in a law that would govern the use of artificial intelligence.
Lawmakers will ask questions to experts and discuss what guardrails may be necessary as AI grows more prominent.
The man widely seen as the godfather of artificial intelligence has quit his job at Google.
CEO Sundar Pichai told us AI will be as good or as evil as human nature allows.
AI is going to require a combination of companies doing the right thing, regulation, and public education.
AI is not about technology. AI is politics.
Some of the loudest voices in the debate there. So who do you think is right? We'd love to know. So do please tell us. The conversation online today will be taking place under the hashtag AI Revolutions. And now I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker of the day, Steven Pinker.
It's hard to anticipate what the problems of a new technology will be when it's going to be adopted by hundreds of millions of people who are going to use it in ways that we can't anticipate, implement solutions to problems that we can't anticipate. I was around when the internet exploded, and I don't think anyone was identifying the harms of becoming addicted to social media or of teenagers being led into anxiety attacks from fear of missing out and social comparison and digital filters that would alter appearance and increase body shame. It just wasn't on the radar then, because people can't anticipate what uses they'll make of a technology. We are acting under uncertainty. There are dangers in premature and excessive regulation, both in terms of crippling a beneficial technology, but also in failing to anticipate some harms that only are visible once the technology is in use. But on the other side, there's the failure of not enough regulation if there are real harms that were not controlled. I don't think there's any algorithm for knowing where the sweet spot is, what's exactly the right amount of regulation, other than just to be aware that there are dangers of too much too soon as well as too little too late. And so partly we're going to have to muddle along and be prepared for the fact that we might miss the sweet spot. But I think the solution is not just regulate everything that moves out of danger of what could happen, because that itself can lead to harm. There's a variety of threats, from the obvious but unknown one of how much unemployment will take place when formerly white-collar jobs perhaps will be replaced by generative AI. There's a fear, of course, of counterfeit people, of the fact that especially the generative AI seems pretty good at synthesizing facsimiles of people, both in their speech, their text, and even in images. Then there's the more speculative so-called existential fears of AI either coming to dominate us the way we dominated other species and dominated less technologically advanced cultures, or killing us all as a kind of collateral damage. So-called paperclipalypse. This is the apocalypse that will happen when the hypothetical AI is tasked with maximizing production of paperclips and thereby uses every raw material within reach to make more paperclips, including our own bodies. And the thing about these scenarios is you can have a lot of fun thinking them up, but they're not examples of artificial intelligence, they're examples of artificial stupidity. There is a tendency to underestimate how intelligent a human is. The fact that there were predictions of autonomous vehicles replacing all the truck drivers and taxi drivers, which haven't come to pass, simply because humans have a lot of common sense that turns out to be not so easy to duplicate in artificial intelligence. In the other direction, there are things that we've just known for years that the human mind is bad at. We've known since the 50s that a dumb regression equation, weight the variables, add them up, outperforms the human expert. Does better at predicting the outcome of disease, recidivism in the criminal justice system, performance of stocks on the stock market, and so on. So in some realms, it doesn't take much to outperform a human mind. And so the promise of artificial intelligence at being even better than a regression equation means there are many areas of human judgment where we can look forward to better decisions. So we have to, I think, get over the ick factor of having an algorithm make a prediction that traditionally has been in the realm of human intuition and gut feeling.
Professor Steven Pinker. Now, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our panel here today. Abiba Birhan is Senior Fellow in Trustworthy AI at the Mozilla Foundation and a member of the UN Secretary-General's high-level advisory body on artificial intelligence. Aurélie Jean is a computational scientist, entrepreneur and author and founder of In Silico Veritas, an agency that develops and deploys data strategies. Gary Marcus is Emeritus Professor of Psychology and Neural Science at New York University, founder of Robust AI and Geometric AI, and the co-author, most recently, of Rebooting AI, Building Artificial Intelligence We Can Trust. Aida Ponce del Castillo is a senior researcher at the Brussels-based Foresight Unit of the European Trade Union Institute. Thank you all for joining us today. And a quick reminder for the people watching, you don't need to be sitting on the panel to be part of the discussion. All you need is a smartphone and social media account. If that applies to you, do please get involved using the hashtag #AIRevolutions. And I want to start by outlining the problem with you, Aurélie Jean. Let's start with you. What's at stake here? What happens if we get this wrong?
Well, first of all, we have to make sure that we understand the in and outs and the mechanisms of the underlying mechanisms of AI technology, because we've been hearing things that are very approximated and wrong about AI, and we tend to listen to actors who have an apocalyptic and long-termist vision on AI, whereas we have today challenges that we have to tackle, for which we have solutions, and others that need to be developed regarding digital labor, technology discrimination, or environmental impact. So it's very important to be careful when we listen to what people are saying about AI, because we have to remember that there are still people around who have a long-termist apocalyptic vision of AI that is not possible technically, scientifically, and philosophically.
Okay, we'll come back to that, I'm sure. But Aida, I want to stick on the issue of the nature of the threat here. So you're part of the trade union movement. How big is the threat to jobs here? A lot of people talk about that, but what's your view?
It depends. It depends on the sector. It depends on the workers, white-collar workers, blue-collar workers. It depends on the country. While some sort of artificial intelligence might be prevalent in some sectors, like in construction or in education sector, others are perhaps less visible, depending on the tasks that are being performed. While some jobs can be segmented into bundle of tasks, some other tasks might be disappeared. So it really needs to have a sectorial view depending on which economic sector we're talking about. We can no longer talk about disappearance of jobs in general, because that's a very generalistic approach to AI, which it doesn't hold anymore.
Okay, thank you, Aida. Now, I want to look at this map here. This shows countries, which we're going to see here, countries with an AI policy. And you can see that a few years ago, back in 2017, not many had one. But as the years have gone by, more countries have adopted it, and you can see the map turning red. But I want to ask you, Berhan, when you look at that map, is there a concern for you about inequality in that some countries, specifically poorer countries, don't have the capacity to develop an AI policy?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, we have seen there has been ample evidence showing that AI systems always go wrong. There is always failure, no matter what application, no matter what specific model you are looking at. And we know that over the past few years, again, there has been robust evidence showing that when AI systems go wrong, nations, communities, people that tend to be most negatively impacted are people that are at the margins of society. So given that, the most marginalized face the most negative impact, whereas a lot of regulation are drafted and developed by developed nation, or rather Western nations, is a little concerning.
Thank you, Abiba. Now, Gary Marcus, let's get your take on the nature of the potential problem here. What are the pitfalls out there for you?
Well, there's so many. I think of large language models, which are the popular form of AI, as kind of like a hydra with many heads. Every day we discover new positive things we might do with them, but we also discover new negative things that people are doing with them. We've seen misinformation accidentally in the form of defamation. We've seen deliberate use of these systems to make disinformation. We've seen them muddy the internet with things like fake books. We've seen cybercrime. We've seen the use of them to create malware at scale, to install malware at scale. There are actually many different forms of harm and risk that we need to navigate here. We've seen non-consensual deepfake porn, and a lot of these things are growing fast. These misapplications are things that when I spoke at the Senate last year, we were only speculating about last May, and now they're here, they've arrived. So there's a rapidly growing array of risks, and there's not going to be any one silver bullet to solve them all, because there are so many different ways in which bad actors can use these tools.
Well, let's get on to the meat of this discussion, which is the potential solutions. And Aida, I want to come to you. You said that the European Union's AI Act is market-focused rather than worker-focused. So how would you, first of all, like to see regulators approach this task?
I would like to see a specific instrument on AI and the world of work, or on AI in the context of employment, where this possible directive will take the task of deriving provisions to fill the gaps that the AI Act couldn't fulfill. Like, for example, some applications in the worker related context that should not be allowed, or that should be limited depending on the sector, but also granting rights, something that the AI Act didn't really fulfill because it was not made for that. And the nature of the AI Act is really geared towards fulfilling sphere and allowing competitive AI to flourish in the EU. Whereas I think that the workers' area, employment, where we will see a lot of AI application, needs to have our sectorial approach.
Well, workers' rights, Aurélie, would you agree with that? And how would you, as a scientist, look after workers?
Well, I really agree with what Aida just said about workers, because digital labor is one of the main focus I think we should talk about. And also I would say it's a good news that we have an AI Act. We have to say that. We have to agree on that. Now it's a matter of how actors are going to comply to it. And then it's a matter of how the articles are going to, last forever or not, because remember, and this is something I'm a bit concerned, is that obviously we want to protect fundamental rights, but we want also to encourage innovation, encourage science. And I want to make sure that when I saw in the past couple of years, like some articles of the AI Act being amended by the legislators because generative AI was coming to the scene, I was a bit worried because generative AI is not new. We've been working on that for so many years, And so I realized that the legislator actually didn't anticipate the raising of generative AI. So I think my main concern is how the article is going to be able to last, over time, considering the fact that the evolution of AI is really fast.
Now, Gary Marcus, I want to read you something from the latest PS Quarterly by Marguerite Vestager, who is, of course, the Executive Vice President of the European Commission. And what she said was that AI will not reach its immense positive potential unless end users trust it. Here, even more than in many other fields, trust serves as an engine of innovation. So the question to you is, how do you regulate for trust? That's hard, isn't it?
I think, in fact, that the AI we have right now doesn't deserve our trust and often gets it. So people use something like ChatGPT and they take its answers to be true, and quite often they're not. We know, in fact, that there's a problem that is sometimes called hallucinations. The ultimate way to get trust is to demand it, to require the companies build trustworthy software or don't allow them to bring it to market. You only get market access if your software is reliable. If we did that right now, we would have to take down large language models altogether. So we could keep things like turn-by-turn navigation systems, which are largely trustworthy, but large language models make up so much stuff so often. They're also biased, which Dr. Berhana couldn't speak to more than I can. They have a huge number of problems that don't merit our trust right now. What we may ultimately need is actually research into new avenues of AI that are built on facts, reasoning, and ethical values. And right now, we're just letting the companies bring things to market that don't have any of that.
Well, let's bring you in, Abiba. Are nation states powerful enough to control this technology? It certainly seems to be in the case of a lot of big tech regulations so far, particularly in Europe, where countries have relied on the EU to keep these giants in tech. So do we need global organizations like the UN here?
Yeah, so that's the idea. I mean, the whole idea behind the UN High Advisory Body on Artificial Intelligence is to have a global body composed of individuals from diverse nations to produce, a guidance or a document that many nations would be willing to adopt. But having said that, coming back to your original questions, as I said, the most marginalized tend to be the most impacted. So yes, the nation's involvement is crucial in regulating AI. But at the end of the day, even with nations' involvement, again, people that face the most harm are either kind of left out, they are not on the table. Look at the EU AI Act itself that we've just been mentioning. If you take, for example, they have banned the use of facial recognition in public spaces, except when for the reasons of violations of privacy, violations of freedom of movement, freedom of rights, and so on. Except with the exception that it can be used on migrants. So as you can see, even the most seemingly comprehensive regulations that are developed by nations tend to again leave out the concerns or the harm that marginalized communities face.
Yeah, well, let me just follow up on that point, because Gary mentioned about the bias that you get in some of these models. How much of a concern is that from your point of view, Abiba?
At this stage, it's past concern. As I said again, look at the entire field of, auditing, AI auditing, or what's known as AI ethics. So many scholars, most of them, more particularly scholars coming from marginalized communities, have meticulously documented by evaluating various models that are used in all domains, in education, in hiring, in law enforcement, and all the evidence shows these systems fail. And when they fail, people that are harmed by it are people across, the margins. Take again facial recognition technology as example. Again, in the US alone, we know that 6 people have gone to jail due to errors in facial recognition systems, and all those 6 people are Black people. 5 of them Black men, 1 of them Black woman.
Okay.
And Professor Pinker has earlier mentioned that in various domains, AI is outperforming humans. But this is a misleading framing. We can say that face recognition systems are outsmarting people or outperforming if we are making those claims without actually considering that people's, actual concrete people their lives are being impacted, their lives have been altered, including going to jail. This framing is really troubling and misleading if we are not accounting for when these systems actually, in fact, go wrong, and when they go wrong, when they fail, they impact people without keeping that in account. Comparing mission performance to human performance is entirely misleading.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just a reminder that if you're interested in hearing more from Project Syndicate contributors on AI policy and much more, become a premium subscriber at projectsyndicate.org to receive your copy of the most recent technology-focused quarterly magazine, Profit and Peril. But you don't need to be a subscriber to get involved today. It's all happening on the hashtag AI Revolutions, and we'd love to hear from you. The team reads every tweet, so do please let us know what you think. I just want to stick with you a little bit further, Abiba, because we've focused so far on some of the regulation that's been developed in the US and the EU, but let's talk about the global south here. There are so many other issues that countries are facing, and tech sectors are often very undeveloped. Is this really a priority for those countries? And who in the global south is striking the right balance here?
So again, a lot of these debates are framed as, as if the Western is developed, leading the AI research, while, the developing world or the global South is impoverished. This, in fact, is again another misleading perspective, another misleading framing, without accounting, power asymmetries, and structural issues that have caused systematic imbalance. If you look at AI research, even I do evaluation and audits on models and datasets, even this kind of work requires huge volumes of access to data, requires compute power, but we can see now that big corporations are leading, or rather, a lot of power is concentrated around these big tech corporations, and that kind of causes a lot of global North researchers to be excluded from research itself. So it's not that there aren't brilliant researchers or brilliant folks that are working on developing various policies across the globe. It's that they are often excluded and due to the resources required to do this kind of work.
Gary Marcus, I'd like to explore some of the parallels with how early internet innovation regulation worked. So let's take a look at this quickly.
There will always be a version of Facebook that is free. It is our mission to try to help connect everyone around the world and to bring the world closer together. In order to do that, we believe that we need to offer a service that everyone can afford and we're committed to doing that.
Well, if so, how do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?
Senator, we run ads.
I see. That's great.
Now, some might say that little smile says a lot about the gap in understanding between the would-be regulators and the regulators, Gary. Do politicians, in your view, have what it takes to keep big tech in check?
I have my doubts about that. I think that some of the politicians very much understand the issues. I've met quite a few in the US and some abroad, but most of them don't have technical training. And the power of money is immense. All of the major companies run massive lobbying campaigns in the millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars collectively. And aside from the campaign finance contributions and so forth, there are, let's say, interesting ties to people that actually work in Washington. There's a revolving door. And they take a lot of advice from the big tech companies. We do not have enough independent oversight. We don't have enough people like the people on the panel today giving advice to the government about what to do or participating in things like auditing. Abiba is fantastic at that. She needs to be involved in the actual auditing that gets done. But you look, for example, at the United States, and the executive order is fantastic in terms of what it does, but it's not actually law. So the U.S. is behind the EU there. We don't have laws that demand very much auditing yet in the United States, and we don't have people like Abiba or myself sitting there having a voice, enough of a voice at the table to say, well, let's look at your software. Let's look at what it actually does. What are the biases here? What are the problems? And we don't have a legal authority to requisition some of the data that we might need for that. So take an example that Abiba mentioned, which is housing or loans or something like that. I would like to be able to look at the logs of OpenAI and say, how are people actually using this? So take employment. So are people feeding in CVs and so forth into ChatGPT saying, should I hire this person? And are there biases? I would like to know that. I would like to see the log of how it's actually using. Even better, I'd like Abiba to do it because she's fantastic at this kind of work. I would love to let her do that and to give her the power, have the government say, hey, OpenAI, you have to cough this up. She's done this great work. She has credentials. We know she can do it, but she needs to see the logs. What did people actually do? If she can't see that, we're very limited in what we can do in this. And that, I mean, that's a crying shame doesn't begin to cover it. It's a serious problem. And there's similar problems across the line. In every risk that we're talking about, we're very limited in what data we have available to work with. So Abiba has done fantastic work looking at the few bits of kind of morsels that we have available about what data has gone into these systems. But we need full transparency into all the data that goes into these systems to do what she's done on a small scale at a much larger scale. Like, she's done the absolute best that she could do, but we're not making publicly available. I hope the EU is going to push hard enough on that. The US is nowhere near to pushing hard enough on data transparency, just as an example.
And well, let's follow up with you, Abiba. Would you like the opportunity to do what Gary has just outlined?
Thank you so much, Gary. You are very kind. You are way too kind. I mean, as Gary said, there is every week, even maybe every day, you see reports from investigative journalists, from civil society doing their own audits, from academics themselves doing, these really important investigations into audits into, state-of-the-art generative models or, AI systems that are integrated into various social spheres. And all the evidence, as I said, indicates to these systems do fail. For example, on misinformation, Gary has said again and again, just last month, they've tested 5 of the top, state-of-the-art generative models to see what kind of information on the US election 5 of the top models would produce. And they found over 50% of the text that was produced was inaccurate and biased and so on. This is just an example. And given that all these systems that are being integrated into the social space end up being, inaccurate, end up failing, end up being discriminatory and biased and so on, we have to do our due diligence. We have to audit them. We have to investigate them. We have to make sure they are as less biased, as discriminatory as possible before we release them in the world. However, this is not this has not been a norm. This is not something that the industry is allowing, that the industry is practicing. In fact, you are, in order to even get data or access to these models, it's practically impossible, as Gary said. So these models that are developed in big tech, they don't remain in big tech lab. They impact people's lives. Subsequently, the people have to be able to see what data they are trained on, how the models are built, what they are optimizing, and so on. Yeah. So, so demanding regulation and demanding that we look into them is absolutely fair, and the least, we should expect.
Exactly. It needs to be not just a norm, but a law that independent researchers like Abiba can get access to the data in order to do these analyses. And I'll just say one thing very briefly, which is you can think about the Ford Pinto situation with the exploding gas tanks in the 1970s in the United States. And a big part of the problem was Ford actually knew that there were problems, but they didn't want to say anything about it. We're having some of the same things. We also need transparency about what internal incidents there are, what internal testing, and we absolutely need a norm that this data is available for independent auditing and a law so the government can say, hey, you need to supply this data.
Yes. Well, let me bring Aurélie in here, because, Gary, you mentioned before about voices round the table. Aurélie, shouldn't we be wary of giving people like Mark Zuckerberg too much of a say in regulation?
Yes, absolutely, for many reasons, because there are big players. They have, obviously, their own agenda. And obviously, they might not have the right words and the right voice and the right ideas and opinions and solutions to tackle those challenges. And as we said, those big players are actually welcomed by countries as state leaders, and I'm very concerned because we have to listen to people who actually talk about the actual, real, current problems that are all the problems that we've been talking about for now. And we don't hear those people, and all the people here today and many other people that we've seen, in some articles and some seminars or roundtable, but in fact, we don't hear them enough, and I think we have to push to be able to have those voices even louder, because right now it's not enough. And also I wanted to come back to what Gary and Abiba said about the transparency, because I think thanks to the generative AI ChatGPT raised in almost 2 years ago, we now talk about the actual matter, which is data. Before, we were talking more about algorithms. We were like, oh, we have to be transparent about the algorithm. And I was always saying that, no, it's about data. Yep. Data matter, and we have to know the sources of data as well as the raw data and how they actually treat this data, transform these data sets. And so this we have to know, and it doesn't provide any secret recipe or anything, but this is really something that we have to think deeply, and we have to encourage and enforce eventually.
Aida, I want to bring you in here as well, because you spoke earlier about the need to, of course, protect workers' rights, but isn't there a danger that tighter regulation actually stifles development and ultimately might end up harming workers by denying them the productivity gains, the fruits of the productivity gains of AI? Christopher Pissarides, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, he wrote in the latest edition of PS Quarterly that historically such adjustments to big changes like AI have not resulted in long-term unemployment. So is there a danger there in your view?
Yes, there is a danger. First of all, workers need to have also some sort of transparency. Just to bridge back to the previous discussion, experts to the code, but there is also a need for transparency for workers to exercise their rights at their own level. And often this type of transparency doesn't need to be that technical. It's about minimal information about what data of their own data is being collected so that they can exercise their digital rights correctly. It depends. In terms of economic gains, it depends. We have a lot of studies from Deloitte, McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, and even ILO, the International Labour Office, that showcase that the gains of artificial intelligence, specifically generative AI, will depend on, one, the level of adoption of the industry, and two, the type of the sector, because not all the sectors will benefit from the gains of AI as such, and other sectors will suffer a lot. These studies, they also predict that labor markets third point of evidence is that not all the productivity gains are equal. Some of the studies project some larger gains, whereas some of the other studies project minor gains, and depending on how much this technology can be adopted. Obviously, the studies say, and this is backed up by studies by the OECD, they state that it depends on the level of the investment of the companies at the sector. Of course, the more they invest on a specific AI application, the more perhaps they will be able to get some gain. So what happens with those countries, with those sectors, or with those companies who will not be able to leverage the benefits of AI and apply them? So here we need to recognize that there will be economic disparities that perhaps might increase current economic disparities as well. I do hope that AI or the application or deployment of AI will not increase current inequalities. The point, at some point, is to decrease the current inequalities, not to create further ones.
Well, yes, thank you, Aida. Plenty to discuss there, of course, and plenty of challenges ahead. But first, this.
I love Project Syndicate. It's a tremendous product. The only issue is they don't have me as a guest enough. It's just very sad.
Now, obviously, that's a fake, just a bit of fun. We'd like to think Donald Trump is a fan of our work, but we don't know for certain. But the more serious point is that this sort of disinformation is incredibly easy to create, and nothing is in place to stop it. We've had a question from Andreas Fosser, AI editor of E24 in Norway. And perhaps this is a good one for you to address, Gary Marcus, because Andreas asks, given the increased ease with which realistic synthetic media content can be created, potentially polluting the information ecosystem and eroding trust in what you see and hear, how, if at all, do you think policy can mitigate and counter these consequences and make sure we have a healthy ecosystem of information in the age of AI? Gary.
I think it's a very uphill struggle. I wrote a piece about a year and a half ago called AI's Jurassic Park Moment. I think that large language models allow the generation of misinformation at very high scale, and that's a serious problem. The least that we could ask for is things like watermarking and labeling of any AI-generated content as an AI-generated content. Impersonation should be illegal. We should have enforcement of that. Same thing with deepfake content. It should be illegal. Non-consensual deepfake porn is kind of a related kind of issue. We should try to get political parties to agree not to use these tools to create misinformation. Ultimately, we should hold social media platforms responsible if they spread a lot of misinformation in order to encourage them to try to cut it down. Ultimately, even more than that, we are going to need to develop new technologies the way that we did for spam and malware and so forth to detect misinformation. Current AI is not really very good at it. Large language models are much better at generating misinformation than they are at detecting it. We're going to need new kinds of technology that are based on facts and reasoning. We need to support the research into those kinds of things in order to build tools to help us fight this, because the worst thing that can happen is simply nobody trusts anything. It's very hard to make democracy work if we land in a place where nobody trusts anything.
Yeah, crucial point there about democracy. Abiba, I want to turn to you. There's been a lot of talk about a global regulatory body for this area. But how do you build, in your view, consensus to the creation of such a body when there's so many competing agendas and priorities across different countries?
That's a great question. Before I answer that, I want to add to something to what Gary Marcus said. Great points. I agree absolutely. But I would even go further and ask or even regulate for clearly harmful technologies such as, voice cloning, not to be released at all in the first place. If you notice the pattern, look at all the large language models or even generative AI that are released into the world. Almost all the time, these systems are released, without rigorous testing, without rigorous critical thinking, without rigorous evaluation. Take Galactica, Facebook's large language model that was released just before ChatGPT last November. It was retracted just 3 days after release because big tech corporations release these models and they leave the onus to do the safeguarding work, to do the auditing work, to do the investigating work, to do, diagnosing the problem of these systems, this kind of dirty work to, either under-resourced scholars like myself. Also, Gary has been doing great work in this space as well. So the pattern we see here is there is no accountability from big tech corporations. So one way to tackle this actual problem is to just not release the system itself. As I said, voice cloning, I can't think of any positive use apart from being used for fraud, for misimpersonation, and so on. So if you look at technologies like voice cloning, the dangers and the harm far outweigh than any potential positive use, which I can't think of at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I can add one sentence, with medication, we know that you have to figure out whether the benefits outweigh the risks before you release it. We need the same for AI.
Interesting. Now, Aida, I want to go big picture with you. When you look at this area, how optimistic are you that the potential threats of AI can and will be contained?
I'm not sure about that question because it depends on from which lenses you are answering that. The AI will release potential existential threats? Well, maybe yes. Maybe for those who will be losing their jobs, that's an existential threat. Maybe for some part of the biodiversity that will be not possible to remedy, that can be also an existential threat. Existential threat is not just about the end of humanity as such. It depends on which sectors or which population or which vulnerable groups will that harm occur. And depending on the severity of the harm, the threat can be existential, as said, between brackets, or not. So existential threats really needs to be tamed and looked from the lenses of the affected group, of the exposed group, and see whether that can be remedied or not.
Well, Aurélie, let me flip the question round slightly, that big picture question. And given everything we've heard today, how optimistic are you that the positive potential of AI can be realised?
Well, I'm very optimistic because actually myself, I have a second startup on AI in a deep tech AI company on medicine, on early breast detection of cancer. And so I know we can do amazing things with AI. That being said, there are actual threats that we have to look at, that we have to solve, and we have to remember that we have to remain far away from all the things we've been hearing about, like human species extermination or the fact that jobs are going to disappear. It's not going to happen. What's going to happen and what's happening now, it's like the threat on democracy, the digital labor, technology discrimination, environmental impact that we have not talked today, but this is an impact as well. And all those things together, and people, researchers, scientists, and engineers are working today on those. And Gary talked about watermarking for, tracking those content, deepfake. I mean, people are working on that, and we have to fund that research.
Great. Now, it's time to open up the floor with some more questions from journalists from around the world. And first, let's hear from Boubacar Siddiqui Haidara, who is editor-in-chief of the Journal du Mali. And what he asks is, in what ways is Africa's AI regulation challenge fundamentally different from those of richer Western economies? Abiba, do you want to field that one?
I mean, there is no single Africa regulatory body. Various countries have developed their own, regulatory systems. Some of them focused on privacy, some of them on data rights, and so on. So just like, Europe is a hugely diverse nation that is not monolithic Africa is also the same. So you have to look at case by case, country by country, to actually see what's there.
Mm-hmm. And we've had this from Ben Armour, who is senior editor at The Yuan in Hong Kong. And he asks, invasion of privacy is an overriding concern as AI advances. Can you cite any policy initiatives specifically targeting privacy that give grounds for optimism, or conversely, any that raise red flags? Aida, what's your view on that?
We still do not have very interesting policy developments in Europe about the strengthening of privacy, but I think that in the area of work, there should be a distinction between lawful monitoring of the employee and surveillance. And we need to make a legal distinction between the two of them, because one, whether it's lawful and it has its limits, the other one is unlawful, it has endless limits and purposes. And for that, really, the end of the privacy of the employee, it's really gone. So that is not yet into the table of discussion of the lawmakers, but it could be very well a point for the next Commission, or the next in the EU, or in the next in another jurisdiction, to make that legal distinction between surveillance and monitoring.
OK, we'll watch this space. And finally, we've had this from Daniel Apostol-Berzu, who is editorial director of Economistul in Romania. He asks, to what extent can AI models be made more transparent and explainable? And is this something that we can legislate? Aurélie, your views on that?
Yes, it's a very important point, explainability. AI explainability has been developed for so many years, more than a decade now. It's based on statistics, mathematics, and algorithmic science. And the goal is to actually either injecting some explainability into the model itself so we can actually understand the underlying mechanisms, or to, after the algorithm is made, to actually apply some methods to extract the logic. And this today is not, you can actually deploy an algorithm, an AI model, without testing it and without applying like explainability methods. And I think it's wrong. We have to have regulation that enforce actors to master as much as they can the explainability of their models. And again, it's possible. There are so many research on that, so many new methods, coming along every 6 months, in papers, and we have to use those. And this starts, by the way, on testing the data on which you train, calibrate, and validate your algorithm.
Well, so much food for thought there. Thanks so much to all of you. And we're going to finish today with some remarks from Amandeep Singh Gill, who is the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Technology.
This tech is very different from previous tech revolutions, so we would need international collaboration from day one. If we don't come together and set up some foundational pieces on AI governance, then what happens? We have fragmentation of governance efforts. We have information asymmetry with regard to what is happening. So even advanced countries may not have the right knowledge for policy making. So we are making policy in the dark, in a sense. We will have a widening digital divide, which will lead to resentment in the global south. And we'll miss out on handling some of the risks that are coming: misinformation, disinformation, biases being amplified, potential misuse to develop bioweapons, and so on. And importantly, miss out on the opportunities, the exciting opportunities that are there. There is an existing digital divide which could be accentuated by rapid developments in AI. As you know, AI is concentrated in a few geographies, even in a few companies. So how do we democratize the opportunity in a responsible way? We have to make sure that governance is not gamed, that it's not gamed in the favor of big tech and companies who can afford to run the regulatory gauntlet. When I go into meetings, multi-stakeholder meetings, there are usual suspects, those 8-10 companies that are always there. So I miss the voice of smaller companies, startups. Often diplomats, my tribe starts to look at it from a very national perspective. I have these champions and I must kind of hang on to those. And how can I work the governance discussions so that it benefits my national companies. I wish there was a little more support for the international collaboration side of it. Different countries, different regions will take their own approaches, but we have a need to bring everything together to make sure that we understand each other when we pursue our respective sovereign governance approaches, make sure that the private sector can operate across borders and civil society has common benchmarks to assess if things are going right or wrong. Without effective governance, without inclusive participation, you cannot realize the opportunities. You cannot innovate because the risks are too high. Someone makes a mistake and the entire field gets set back because there'll be a boomerang, there'll be a backlash, and there'll be heavy-handed regulation. We don't have risk or that kind of technology and its ecosystem that we had with nuclear weapons or with other powerful technologies. So we have to be more inventive. We have to think out of the box. And we need a combination of soft norms based in some hard law, international human rights law, international humanitarian law. So there is a window of opportunity. And if we move fast, we can seize the opportunity.
Well, thank you once again to all our contributors. I'm Ben Chu. You've been watching Now or Never for AI Policy from Project Syndicate and 2040 World. This was the first in Project Syndicate's AI Revolutions series. Thank you for joining us.